They thought it was just timber. But those stolen logs were everything. My savings, my father's legacy, our future in the mountains. The HOA claimed it was abandoned. Then they forged my signature. Now we're taking this all the way to court, and I'm not backing down. If someone had told me a year ago that I'd be standing in the middle of a foggy mountain clearing, hands on my hips, surrounded by 100 logs and the smell of pine and wet earth, I would have laughed them out of the room. But there I was, staring at our future, or what was supposed to be, the foundation of something real, something mine. I bought the land in early spring after losing my job in a strategic restructuring, as the company called it, which basically meant, your expensive goodbye. I was 35, unmarried, burnt out, and ready to claw my way back to some version of peace. Dad, 70 and stubborn, didn't hesitate. "Let's build it ourselves," he said. "Like in the old days, you, me, and a bit of sweat." It wasn't just any patch of land. It was a 5-acre slope in the Sierra Nevada foothills, bordered by a creek and shaded with old oaks and firs. No neighbors in sight, no street lights, no barking dogs or passive-aggressive HOA newsletters about mailbox height or grass length. Just silence and sky. We called it the Ridge, like it already had a place on the map. We didn't have a mansion budget. What we did have was enough to get started, barely. I pulled everything I had from savings, cashed a retirement account I wasn't supposed to touch for another 30 years, and Dad chipped in from his pension. We scraped it all together to buy the lot and get our first delivery of premium eastern white pine. Long, straight logs, each one carefully chosen. They'd been custom cut and shipped in, 100 of them. That was our skeleton, our future walls, rafters, porch posts. It cost more than I want to admit, but it was worth every penny. We were building with our own hands, something lasting. I remember that morning clearly. We stood with our coffee watching the delivery truck back down the narrow dirt path we had flattened with a rented grader. The sun was just breaking through the trees, and I swear even Dad got misty-eyed. We unloaded them one by one, stacking them with precision inside the temporary fence we'd put up around the site. Wooden posts, orange flag line, and a big laminated sign that read, "Private property, construction materials, no trespassing." We spent the next week setting up: generator, tool shed, a second-hand skid steer. Every nail gun, bolt, and beam was cataloged, marked, and tarped. Dad handled the ledger like it was the Constitution. We had lists for everything: where each log would go, how we'd raise the beams, which days we'd rest. We even marked the future front door with chalk. There was a rhythm to it. Early mornings, pancakes on a camp stove, stretching our backs and diving into the dirt. We didn't mind the work. We welcomed it. There was something sacred about cutting a trench for the water line with your own hands, or hearing the sharp thunk of a post going in straight. It felt like building more than a cabin. It felt like building a future we could trust again. Then we went down into town, just for the day. A 2-hour drive. We needed brackets, roofing felt, and some damn good burgers. The weather was supposed to hold and the area was remote. We'd locked the gate, left everything in place. We got back just after sunset. I remember pulling off the road, headlights sweeping across the clearing, and I froze. I thought we'd taken a wrong turn. The clearing was empty, gone. The logs were gone, all of them. The generator, the skid steer, the tool crates, even the tarps. All that remained was torn ground and 2 tire tracks, wide, fresh, brutal. The fence had been clipped and peeled back like a banana skin. The sign, shredded and tossed in the mud. Dad didn't speak for a full minute. He just stared at the flattened earth, mouth slightly open. Then he walked into the center of the site and turned slowly, like trying to spot something he missed. I followed, heart hammering in my chest. "This can't be real," I said, though I tasted the truth already. There weren't even splinters. Someone had come prepared. A flatbed, maybe a forklift. They didn't just steal, it looked like they tried to erase us. Dad sat down on a stump. He didn't curse, didn't yell, just rubbed his knees and stared ahead. That scared me more than if he'd lost his temper. I called the sheriff. The dispatcher told me a deputy would come by within 72 hours. I laughed into the phone and hung up. It was too clean, too fast, too planned. That night we sat in the truck, engine idling for warmth. Dad finally said, "That was everything, son. Everything we had." I looked at the clearing one last time before pulling the blanket over him. My fists hurt from clenching, my throat was raw. They didn't just steal our logs, they stole time, sweat, hope. But they left behind a promise. I was going to find out who did it, and I was going to burn them legally to the ground. The next morning I woke up with grit in my teeth and a storm boiling in my gut. I hadn't slept much, neither had Dad. We just sat in the cab of the truck all night, the windshield fogging up, the heater huffing out that stale, mechanical warmth. When the sun broke through, it didn't feel like a new day. It felt like an autopsy. The first stop was the sheriff's office in town. I wasn't expecting much, and I didn't get it. Deputy Carlson was a broad-shouldered man with a face that looked permanently unimpressed. He listened to my report while sipping coffee like it was a bedtime story. When I showed him the pictures from my phone, the fenced perimeter, the laminated sign, the stacked logs, and then the barren patch of dirt, he raised one eyebrow and said, "You sure you didn't just move them?" "No," I said too calmly. "I didn't move 100 logs, a generator, and a skid steer while I was ordering cheeseburgers 2 hours away." He rubbed his chin like he was deeply considering whether or not I was an idiot. "Could be a misunderstanding. Maybe someone thought it was scrap. You file a report, we'll open a case." I filed the damn report. It felt like dropping a message in a bottle and throwing it into a sewer. Dad didn't even go in with me. He stayed outside on the bench watching cars go by like he was in some other dimension. When I got back in the truck, he just said, "Where to now?" I wasn't sure. But something about the tire tracks nagged at me. Wide, dual axles. It wasn't a pickup, it was industrial. Whoever took our stuff had the equipment and the nerve to do it fast and clean. This wasn't some backwoods thief. This was coordinated. We drove back up toward the ridge, taking the long route through a nearby residential enclave called Aspen Heights. Big houses, big gates, big attitudes. HOA country. I'd seen it on maps, but never paid it much attention. Until now. And that's when we saw it. A truck. Parked just inside the gates. Same wheelbase. Same color as the one that could have taken our logs. On the door was a logo. Aspen Heights Maintenance and Grounds Division. I stopped the truck. Dad looked at me. "You thinking what I'm thinking?" "Yeah," I said, already getting out. We passed through the open gates. Pedestrian access wasn't restricted, and walked up to the HOA office. It looked more like a bank than an administrative building. Sleek glass, fake stone walls, brushed steel handles. Inside, a thin woman in pearls and a cardigan that cost more than my monthly budget looked up from her desk with a tight-lipped smile. "Can I help you?" "I hope so," I said as politely as I could fake. "I'm looking for Meredith Clark. I believe she's the HOA president." "She is. Do you have an appointment?" "No," I said, "but I do have a missing house." A pause. She picked up the phone, murmured something, then gestured to a side hallway. "Second door on the right." The office was a minimalist nightmare. White everything. A little bonsai tree. No personal touches, no photos, just control. Meredith Clark was sitting behind a desk with that serene, surgically clean look of someone who never cleaned a thing herself. Her blazer was gray. Her hair was blonde in the way money makes it blonde. She looked at me like I was someone who'd tracked mud across her soul. "Mr. Miller," I said. "Ethan Miller. I own a lot just up north, Ridgeview area." She smiled like she'd been trained to do it in court. "I'm not familiar." I sat down anyway. "Someone removed construction materials from my land. We have a fence, a sign, the works. And I've been told one of your trucks was in the area around the time it happened." Her face didn't move an inch. "Our team performed standard grounds cleanup in that area. It's not uncommon for people to dump unwanted construction debris in unzoned areas." "Debris?" I repeated. "It was stacked timber, premium white pine, ordered, paid for, and staged for construction. There was a generator, a skid steer, and more equipment." She leaned back, still calm. "That may be, but from our perspective it was unsecured material left on what appeared to be unclaimed land. We acted under the authority granted by our maintenance charter." I stared at her. "That's theft." She gave the tiniest of shrugs. "If you feel that way, you're welcome to pursue legal action. Though I should inform you, we do have a signed document relinquishing rights to the material in question." My blood froze. "What did you say?" She opened a drawer and slid a page across the desk. I didn't touch it. It was a printed form, typed neatly with my name on it, and what looked like my signature at the bottom. A waiver, a donation agreement for materials abandoned on common grounds. "That's a forgery," I said. "I never signed this." "That's unfortunate," she replied with the icy empathy of a brick wall. I stood up, trembling with contained rage. "You're going to regret this." She folded her hands. "I doubt that." We left. Outside, I paced in circles while Dad sat down on the curb like he was trying to hold gravity together. "This is bigger than we thought," he said. "They've got paperwork." I nodded. "Yeah. But if they want a war over paper, they picked the wrong bastard to lie to." Back at the motel, I laid the forged document flat on the bedspread and stared at it like it had insulted my entire bloodline. The signature. They'd nailed it. It wasn't a lazy scribble. It was mine. Or at least close enough to fool someone who didn't know any better. Hell, maybe even someone who did. "Son," Dad said from across the room, flipping through the folder of receipts we'd kept. "They were waiting for us to be gone. That wasn't a mistake. That was surgical." I nodded, jaw tight. "They planned it. And now they're covering their tracks with lies in a goddamn PDF." We needed help. So I called Sophia Marquez. She was a civil attorney I'd worked with a few years back on a zoning issue. Sharp as a tack, morally allergic to bullshit, and probably the only lawyer I've ever met who could insult you in Latin. She agreed to meet that evening in her office over on Harrison. When we walked in, Sophia was already behind her desk, dark curls tied up, glasses on, the smell of Vietnamese takeout in the air. "Ethan," she said, looking over her frames, "you look like you've been mugged by a spreadsheet." "I've been mugged by an HOA," I said, dropping the forged document onto her desk like it was radioactive. She read it, dead silent. Her eyebrow twitched. Then she picked it up, held it to the desk lamp, and smiled in that terrifying lawyer way. "They didn't even try," she muttered. "You can see the pixel bleed on the signature layer. Classic cut and paste, probably lifted from your driver's license or a public filing." I blinked. "Wait, you can tell that just from looking?" "Oh, honey, this is amateur hour. Give me a week and I'll have it torn apart by 3 experts and a guy named Stan who lives in a basement full of scanners." Dad leaned forward. "They stole everything we had." Sophia finally looked up. "Then let's bury them in discovery." We started building the case. Sophia filed a preliminary claim with the county court requesting a temporary injunction against the HOA to preserve all records and footage. We needed proof of their operation. I wanted the receipts. I wanted the emails. I wanted the smug expression on Meredith Clark's face turned into a public apology under fluorescent lighting. But we hit a snag. Aspen Heights refused to release their surveillance footage. They claimed it had already been automatically overwritten. Convenient. Too convenient. But the universe for once handed me a breadcrumb. I was at a diner outside of town getting gas station coffee and overheard two guys in fluorescent vests griping about Clark's little weekend cleanup project. I slid into the booth next to them and asked very politely if they were talking about the Aspen Heights HOA. They were maintenance subcontractors. And yeah, they'd been hired by the HOA to clear out a dump site on a private lot north of the community. The guy even remembered the stack of logs. "Hell of a haul," he said. "Didn't even know that was someone's property." I offered to buy their pie and coffee if they'd repeat everything they just told me to my phone. That night, Sophia nearly spilled her foe when I played the recordings. "Do you realize what this is?" she said. "This is direct admission of unauthorized entry and removal of property on tape. They've just made your case." But it got better. One of the workers, after a little more coaxing, mentioned that the logs didn't go to a dump. They went to a private storage site owned by, wait for it, Aspen Heights HOA. Dad looked like he was going to combust. "They still have them?" We drove out that night. There was a fenced lot about 4 miles from the HOA community center. Inside, 2 big stacks of white pine logs under a tarp with the same red tags we'd used to mark orientation. I took pictures. Sophia said we needed more. We needed confirmation from someone inside. That's when I remembered Joe. Joe was our nearest neighbor, grumpy, reclusive, Vietnam vet with a limp and a loaded shotgun he cleaned more often than his dishes. But he also had a telescope on his porch that he used to watch the stars and other suspicious bastards. When I asked if he'd seen anything the day we were gone, he gave me a long look, then shuffled inside. He came back with a thermos, a Ziploc bag full of jerky, and a thumb drive. "Didn't know if it'd matter," he said. "But I like saving stuff just in case." The footage showed a truck with Aspen Heights markings backing onto my property. 2 guys got out, snipped the fence, rolled up the sign like it was garbage, and started loading the logs with a forklift. Sophia nearly cried. "This is golden. This is beyond golden. This is their screwed on 5 separate counts golden." But Meredith wasn't done. 3 days later, Aspen Heights filed a counterclaim. Miller versus Aspen HOA. Fraudulent storage, environmental violation, unauthorized burning of construction material. That's right. They were accusing Wu Mian of burning my own lumber in a fire pit and fabricating a theft report. According to their new expert witness, a fire inspector named Brock Farnell, there were clear indicators of accelerated combustion in the soil near the clearing. Translation: a little ash and some conveniently dumped charred wood fragments. We sent Sophia and her own expert up to the site. His response: "These jokers couldn't fake a campfire if you gave them matches and instructions." Turns out the ash wasn't from pine. It was mostly brush and dried sage, probably from a bonfire months earlier. Plus, it had rained the entire night before our return. There was no way a fire burned through stacked logs in that weather. But they weren't trying to win. They were trying to confuse, muddy the waters, make it look like a neighbor dispute. They were playing dirty and they were playing public. I needed something louder than a lawyer. I needed eyes. So I made a video, 10 minutes, just me, the empty clearing, photos of the stolen logs, a clip of Joe's footage, and a few lines straight from the gut. "My name is Ethan Miller. My father and I saved for years to build a cabin. Aspen Heights HOA stole it. They forged a contract to cover it up, and now they're accusing us of burning it ourselves. I posted it everywhere. YouTube, Reddit, Facebook. It spread like kerosene on a campfire. Then I got the call. Congressman Richard Grayson's office. They wanted to talk. Congressman Grayson didn't call me directly, of course. First, it was someone named Caleb from his outreach team, who introduced himself with the enthusiasm of a TED Talk speaker and the attention span of a Twitter feed. But he got straight to the point. The congressman is preparing a segment on overreach and abuse of power in private governance structures. He saw your video and wants to include your story. I agreed before he even finished the sentence. By the next morning, Grayson had tweeted the video with the caption, "When a private HOA thinks it's above the law, it's time we remind them who makes the laws. Accountability. HOA overreach." And just like that, I went from anonymous angry dude with a shovel and a lawyer to Exhibit A in a congressional PR war. My phone blew up. Journalists, bloggers. A podcast called Civic Chaos asked for an interview. Someone sent me fan art of my face on a log with the words, "Don't tread on timber." Meanwhile, Sophia was stacking legal charges like Jenga blocks. With Joe's footage, the worker recordings, the ash report, and the photos from the HOA's storage lot, we had a case that could punch through concrete. But we weren't the only ones working overtime. Meredith Clark, who I was starting to suspect bled printer toner and chlorine, was doubling down. Her lawyer, Conrad Bryce, looked like the kind of man who kept extra teeth in a drawer. He showed up to the preliminary hearing with a briefcase full of smugness and a whole new defense. The materials were legally removed from a non-demarcated space due to environmental hazard concerns and complaints from nearby properties. "Nearby properties?" Sophia said aloud in front of the judge. "You mean wildlife and pine trees?" Bryce adjusted his tie and continued without blinking. "My client was acting in the community's best interest. Furthermore, Mr. Miller's property was, until recently, improperly recorded in county zoning maps. There is ambiguity as to whether the land was formally designated for residential use. That was the new play. Bury us in paperwork and obscure municipal language until the whole thing collapsed under its own bureaucratic weight." But Sophia wasn't having it. She filed a motion to compel HOA's internal emails and communications for the week surrounding the incident. And then, bless the broken IT infrastructure of corrupt suburban management, we struck gold. Turns out Meredith wasn't just sloppy. She was arrogant. In a thread labeled Materials Strategy sent to the HOA board, she wrote, "If we don't clear that trash out soon, it'll attract squatters or worse. Nobody's watching it. Grab it, rebrand it, use it for the Green Path initiative. The guy probably won't even come back." Rebrand it, like it was a corporate pivot. Even better? Attached to the same thread was a mocked-up flyer titled Aspen Heights Community Renewal, a sustainable step forward, with a picture of my logs laid out as a walking trail, complete with a cartoon squirrel and the HOA logo. Dad read it and just said, "Well, we made it into marketing. Shame we weren't paid." The judge accepted Sophia's evidence and denied the HOA's motion to dismiss. We were officially greenlit for trial, and public opinion wasn't exactly in Meredith's corner. A local journalist did a piece called The Timber Heist and aired it on the evening news with B-roll of the clearing, me holding a measuring tape and an old photo of Dad smiling next to the first delivery. We were small-town celebrities, except instead of signing autographs, we were signing court affidavits. Then came the bombshell. Meredith tried to settle. She called Sophia directly, offered to return the logs, what remained of them, and a courtesy payment of $15,000 if we dropped all claims. Sophia didn't even flinch. You stole nearly $70,000 in materials and equipment, defamed my client, falsified documents, and dragged his name through the mud. You think we're settling for less than it cost to build a patio? Meredith got nasty after that. Her legal team accused me of collusion, fraud, defamation, and absurdly, emotional manipulation of public sentiment through digital channels. You mean the internet? I said. They're just mad we used better hashtags, Sophia replied. The next hearing drew a crowd, activists, reporters. Even Caleb from Grayson's office showed up, nodding solemnly like he was standing over a fallen soldier. The judge reminded everyone that it wasn't a circus. But when Sophia played the video of HOA workers peeling back our fence and loading the logs, you could feel the air shift in the room. Meredith didn't look at me once. We weren't done yet. But the veneer of control, of authority, of untouchable HOA power, it cracked, and we were going to shove a subpoena straight through the gap. The courthouse smelled like Lysol and lost hope. I sat in the front row, suit too tight across the shoulders, palms damp, neck itching from a tie I hadn't worn since my last job interview. Dad sat beside me in a flannel shirt under a tweed blazer, his left knee bouncing like a nervous metronome. Across the aisle, Meredith Clark looked like she was about to deliver a keynote speech, not stand trial. Her hair was perfect, her smile glued on. Her lawyer, Bryce, looked like a man who ate objections for breakfast. But none of it mattered anymore. Because today it wasn't just about paperwork. It wasn't just me versus HOA. It was a full-blown jury trial, and for once the public was paying attention. Sophia opened strong. She walked the jury through every step of our story like a practiced conductor. The purchase, the delivery, the fence, the sign, the logs, the disappearance. She showed the photos, played the videos, dropped the audio recordings. Each time the jury's faces tightened a little more. Even the guy in the back who'd looked bored during voir dire leaned forward. Then she called Dad to the stand. He moved slowly. The bailiff helped him up the stairs. He adjusted the microphone like he was tuning a radio. But when he spoke, his voice was clear, measured, full of gravel and weight. "I'm 70 years old," he began. "I've worked every kind of job, built homes, raised kids, buried my wife. That cabin, those logs were the last thing I had to build with my son before I'm gone. And they took it, like it was garbage." "You could hear a pin drop," Bryce objected. "Speculation, irrelevant emotional appeal." The judge overruled it, bless her soul. Next, we brought in the expert, our signature analyst. She broke down in delightfully condescending terms how the signature on the HOA's fake release form was constructed. "This is not a scanned signature," she said, laser pointing at the screen. "This is a digital composite, clipped from a license or another document, then overlaid into a PDF. Sloppy work, too. You can see the edge aliasing." Bryce tried to counter with their own witness, some compliance officer who claimed he had seen similar agreements in the past. The man couldn't even remember what day he received the file. Sophia took him apart like a mechanic dismantling a lawnmower. Then came the HOA's big play, their fire expert, Brock Farnell. He swaggered onto the stand with the confidence of a man who once set a trash can on fire and called it science. He spoke about ash patterns, residual combustion, thermal anomalies. Sophia raised an eyebrow. "Mr. Farnell, are you certified by the California State Fire Marshal's Office?" He paused. "I have consulted with agencies that—" "That's a no, then. And you have no formal degree in fire science, correct?" "I have field experience." "Which consists of what, exactly?" "Mostly incident response for outdoor recreational events." "You were a bonfire marshal at a music festival, weren't you?" He fidgeted. "It was called ignition." The courtroom laughed. The judge banged the gavel once, but the damage was done. The fire theory was toast. Sophia's final blow came with the HOA emails. The jury saw them all. The internal conversations, the phrases like, rebrand it, nobody will notice, and we can claim it was abandoned. Meredith's name was on every thread. She never looked up once. Then Sophia asked to play one last clip. It was my video, the one I made on my phone standing in the clearing telling our story. The one that had gone viral. The judge allowed it. For context, she said. I watched the jury as they watched me on screen. Watched their expressions shift. Watched some of them nod. Sophia's closing was brief. Ladies and gentlemen, she said, this isn't about land. It's not about lumber. It's about power. And the people who think they're allowed to abuse it just because they have a title and a gate. You don't have to let them. Bryce droned for 15 minutes about technicalities and miscommunications. His tie was crooked by the end. The jury was out for 3 hours. When they returned, the foreman stood with a single sheet in his hand and said words I'll never forget. We find in favor of the plaintiff, Ethan Miller. We were awarded $95,000 in damages, full reimbursement, restitution for the generator, the tools, the logs, an additional penalty for forged documentation, and an official sanction on Aspen Heights HOA for malicious misconduct. Meredith turned pale. Bryce actually dropped his pen. The courtroom buzzed as people stood, some even clapping. Dad squeezed my shoulder with one hand and wiped his face with the other. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. Sophia handled them like a seasoned general, while I gave maybe the most awkward victory fist bump in local television history. Meredith didn't speak to the press. She just walked straight to a black sedan and slammed the door so hard it echoed down the block. We didn't go out for steaks or champagne. We drove straight back to the ridge. It was late afternoon by the time we got there. The sun was leaning low, casting long shadows across the clearing. The same clearing where, not long ago, our hopes had been stolen out from under us. But this time, we weren't just two guys staring at a patch of dirt and busted dreams. We were two guys with justice in our pockets and plans in our hands. Dad got out of the truck and stretched, groaning like every joint had rusted during the trial. Let's make this place noisy again, he said, and I swear that moment felt louder than any victory speech. The money came in stages, first the reimbursement for the materials, then the penalties, then the interest and legal fees, all wired directly into a new account we named the Lodge Fund, because calling it the HOA Payback Piggy Bank wasn't very bank-friendly. Sophia even helped us set it up, smiling like a proud war strategist. We didn't rebuild exactly what we'd planned before. We went bigger. A local contractor who saw our story on the news offered discounted services. Volunteers from nearby towns came up on weekends. A couple of architecture students from UC Davis reached out with blueprints they'd designed for a class project. They called it Resilience Through Timber. I nearly cried just reading the title. We hired a crew but made sure to stay hands-on. Dad wouldn't have it any other way. He insisted on laying the first beam himself, even though it took him 3 tries and a pulled back. I did the framing with 2 volunteers named Aiden and Jules who brought beer and an unhealthy amount of granola bars. By mid-fall, the main structure was up. The cabin had a wraparound porch, wide southern-facing windows, and a fireproof metal roof because, after everything, we weren't taking any more chances. The floors were pine naturally, the same kind, the same grain. Every log we could recover was incorporated. The ones that weren't salvageable, we turned into furniture. The coffee table was made from the original ridge post. We carved our initials into the bottom, just us two. EM plus FM. We didn't stop there. The idea started over dinner with Sophia and Joe. Yes, even Joe came down from his sniper's nest to celebrate. We were talking about all the people who'd reached out to us. People from other counties, other states. People who had their own HOA horror stories. Sophia said something like, "You should turn this place into a retreat for folks like you." It clicked. What if the lodge wasn't just our cabin? What if it was a refuge? A place for people fighting their own ridiculous, unjust, overreaching battles with power and paperwork. We filed for a nonprofit license within a week, called it Lodge Liberty. The mission? Provide weekend stays, legal consultation, and mental health support for individuals overwhelmed by local governance abuse. Sounded niche at first, until the applications rolled in. The first guest was a school teacher from Nevada whose HOA tried to fine her for flying a state flag. The second, a retired Marine whose trailer was declared non-conforming and forcibly removed. Every story made me angrier and more determined. We built a small cabin nearby, just 2 rooms, a kitchenette, and a fire pit. The stories came, and so did the people. Dad started a photo wall inside the main lodge. Survivors of bureaucracy. He took Polaroids, wrote their names and hometowns underneath. By winter, it wrapped halfway around the dining room. We were healing and helping and laughing again. A month later, Congressman Grayson came by in person. His staffers filmed a short piece for his campaign reel. He gave a speech on the porch about the spirit of private resilience and everyday people standing against the misuse of authority. I mostly remember that he tripped on the porch step and said, "Jesus Christ, who built this thing?" And Dad said, "We did, bad knees and all." The clip went viral. People started calling the lodge the little capital in the pines. I hated that, but also, I kinda loved it. By the time the snow came, the place looked like a postcard. And for the first time in what felt like years, I felt safe and seen. Spring arrived with the kind of stubborn warmth that dared the snow to stay. By then, the lodge was fully operational. We had running water, solar panels, a growing wait list of guests, and a stack of letters from people we'd never met, thanking us for fighting a fight that they thought they had to face alone. But we never forgot how it started. One morning, while Dad was repainting the deck rails, again, he looked up from his coffee and said, "We ever gonna deal with that fence?" He meant the boundary line, the one between our lot and the road leading down to Aspen Heights. The one Meredith's crew had once snipped open like they owned it. The one I'd never quite had the energy to fix. So we did something about it. We used the remaining beams from the recovered logs. The ones too warped or cracked to serve as walls, but still strong enough to stand. We erected a new fence, tall and solid, with cross beams and iron posts. Then we added something extra. A carved archway right over the entry gate, big wooden letters burned into the grain. Private doesn't mean powerless. People started stopping by just to take pictures, hikers, cyclists. Someone even posted it on Google Maps as a local landmark of resistance. Tour buses didn't show up or anything, thank God, but we did have a wedding under it once. A woman who won a case against her HOA's pool policy said it was her spiritual revenge venue. I mean, hey, who were we to say no? Then came the part we hadn't expected. Aspen Heights filed for leadership re-election. Meredith, facing mounting pressure, announced she wouldn't be seeking another term. No apology, no statement, just gone. A whisper among her own. Word was she'd quietly put her house on the market and moved to Arizona. Apparently they have HOAs there too. The new board president, a retired librarian named Denise, called us out of the blue. "I think we'd all like to, well, move past things," she said. "Start clean." I told her I appreciated the sentiment, but fences, literal or otherwise, don't mend themselves overnight. We agreed to no formal relationship, just peace. Fair enough. A few weeks later, the local high school invited me and Dad to speak. They'd done a civic unit on local governance and used our case as an example of civil resistance. I stood in a gym full of teenagers who couldn't care less about zoning laws and tried to explain what it meant to fight for something that was yours, and yours alone. I told them about the first time we stood on this land, about the logs, the theft, the lie, the trial. I told them about building something anyway. Afterwards, one kid raised his hand and said, "So are you guys anti-HOA now?" Dad answered before I could. "Son, we're not anti-anything, we're just pro-getting left alone." The applause was small, but real. Back at the lodge that night, we had a bonfire. Just a little one. Legal, contained, with permits. Don't worry, the sky was clear, the stars were sharp. And for once, nobody was watching over our shoulders. Dad handed me a beer and nodded toward the fire. "You know," he said, "you never did burn any of those fake documents." I grinned. "Yeah? Yeah. Might be time." So I went inside, pulled the envelope from the old lockbox, the forged release form, the fake environmental concern memo. The HOA flyer with our logs turned into a cartoon hiking trail. I dropped them in one by one. The fire crackled, turned bright for a second, and then settled. And we sat there in the quiet, letting it all burn. For real this time.